Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon your time zone. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I want to welcome you to today's program, Software Usage Data, Driving Decisions Throughout Your Development Lifecycle. Before we get into that program, I have a couple of brief housekeeping announcements. First is that today's program is going to be followed by a question and answer session. To ask a question, of course, navigate to your control panel, go to the Windows, the question tab in the window, and type in your question, hit submit. We'll get to as many as time allows. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand on the SD Times website for you to play over and over, share with your friends to your heart's content. All right, as for today's program, in SD Times, we've been reporting that software development with its increasing speed needs people to work faster and smarter. However, collecting and analyzing software usage data can help developers make faster, more efficient decisions at all stages of the life cycle. So to talk about this further today is Keith Fennick. He's Vice President of Software Analytics at Revulytics, which is the sponsor of today's program. Keith was co-founder and CEO of Trackbird Software Analytics before his company was acquired by Revulytics. And he's now responsible for the strategic direction and growth of the usage analytics business within Revulytics. Now I'm going to turn it over. Keith, take it away.
Thank you very much, David. So, hello, everyone. So, as David clearly indicated, kind of what will be during this webinar, what we'll be discussing is some key points related to how usage intelligence can help you in the software development lifecycle. So we'll start by seeing who Revulytics is, what we do. I'll also be giving you ideas on how we should identify with the end user. And after that, we'll also see how software development pain points can be helped via usage intelligence. And in the end, we'll also have a little chat about how would you go about choosing or building a usage intelligence solution. So let's get started with who we are. So kind of what makes us, what kind of brought us to this webinar and why we're doing this. Effectively, over the past like 6-7 years, we've been working with several software development companies because Revulytics offers software companies a cloud-based solution that can generate actionable intelligence. And we generate intelligence based on both the use and also the misuse of software applications. We do this in two aspects. We have the compliance analytics side of the business, which helps you identify and quantify software use and misuse, like detecting piracy, allowing you to monetize that piracy. And on the other hand, we also deal with usage analytics, which is the scope of this webinar. So we'll be focusing on how usage analytics can help you track and analyze product usage, and how this can help you increase your customer acquisition, retention, and adoption of your product. We've been recognized by Gartner as a cool vendor back in March this year. And, just some background on the company, we have more than 100 customers, including Fortune 500 companies. And we have helped these customers over the past few years to generate more than 1.8 billion in new licensing revenue. So kind of our technology, the SDKs, have been deployed to over 50 million machines out there. So kind of we've been working with a lot of companies and making a lot of companies successful by taking advantage of data. So let's jump straight into this. So as a developer, it can be very, very easy for you to get lost building what you consider the ideal solution, right? Yet from within your development environment, sometimes it's very difficult to know how your products are affecting users, both in the good and in the bad, right? Because what for a developer, for example, might be a minor hiccup in the application could be part of a crucial repetitive workflow in a customer's live environment. So this could cause tremendous pain and frustration, right? So what for a developer, something minor can be a big thing for on the customer side. And for those of you familiar with Jeff Atwood, I'm sure all of you are familiar with Stack Overflow. Jeff Atwood was the co-founder, and he really believes, and I 100% agree with the guy, that developers should literally even sit down on support calls to be able to feel the pain that customers are facing when using the product, or the pain points that they're trying to solve with the product. And knowing this, knowing exactly what the customer is trying to do, will allow you to build better products that actually help solve these pain points. And you will actually be very surprised if you sit down and observe how users use your product, the weird ways in which they end up using the functionality that you built, ways in which you never imagined, right? I mean, you can, let's say, you built an accounting package. You might cry when you learn how many people are using it as a simple calculator. And I had personal experience with this as when I was a product manager at GFI Software. I was like managing one of the network security products. And this product was awesome, right? It could launch rockets for network security administrators. However, at one point, we had discovered that one of the most used features within this product was actually something that a single developer built in a single afternoon, right? And this was practically like a network discovery tool. And we only threw it, this wasn't even the product management roadmap, but we threw it in there to help some beta testers out when they were testing out our product. It turned out that everybody loved this tool so much that we had to keep it in the product, and we actually discovered that there were people buying the product simply to use this simple tool. Now, this was like less than 1% of the functionality of this tool. So that goes to explain that your reality inside your office kind of might be very different than what your users' reality is all about. Hence why it is so crucial to observe the user's behavior. So the only way for you to do this is to go out there and listen to your users, or better still, use a framework that listens and does the observation for you. This is another example I came across very recently, and where I was like baffled and scratching my head, thinking, how on earth would somebody ever think about building a Monopoly game using Excel? And why would you do it? So you would think, I don't think any of the Excel engineering team would have ever imagined that gaming is as a use case for their product, right? But in reality, there are people out there who did it. Now, whether they did it for fun, this is like it's an extreme case. But the probability of this happening would be comparable to seeing a pink dinosaur, right? So kind of when you look at these and when you observe users in various ways, you will understand that it's very hard to predict how people are using your software out there. And the best way of doing this is by using usage analytics, right? And embedded analytics to collect this data. And before we go on, we actually have a poll that I would like David to manage, because we would like to know what product data you guys are collecting right now. So, David?
Yeah, so just check on the box that applies to what you're doing. Basic usage, are you collecting that data from like a call home, application performance data, crash reports, debugging logs, usage analytics, or are you not collecting data from your applications at all? Check on the box, hit submit, and we'll share the information with you a little later on in the program. Keith?
Thank you very much. So we'll give some people to reply to that. So what we would like to have a look at before we move on is also some challenges related to software development. So as many of you are, very much aware, is that, the major release is always around the corner. Dates are slipping. The marketing is pushing you on a release date. The build that was supposed to save you and the rest of the world just broke everything that worked like last week. So, I'm very sure that this sounds very familiar to you. Although for some people, this might be like an excerpt from a horror movie. For a developer, this is a typical Wednesday afternoon, right? So what we'll be looking at now is how can software usage intelligence help you deal with these situations? So before we go on to that, David, maybe you can get us the results of the poll so we can have a look at that.
Okay, so it looks like the majority of people are collecting crash reports and debugging logs, and half of the respondents chose usage analytics.
Okay.
Interestingly, application performance and basic usage counts from a simple call shared the least collected data at 29% each.
Okay. Anybody answering none?
Wow, 33% of the people are not collecting any data at all from their applications. That's interesting.
Okay, so we're looking at, like, I'm very glad to see that 50% of the respondents are already using usage analytics, because that's great, kind of. So a lot of what we've discussed kind of already homes into them. So hopefully you learn something from this webinar too. I'm very impressed that kind of 33% of people are not using any data at all. So I'm very curious as to how decisions are being made for such products. But let's move on, kind of, and try and home into these results further on. So when you look at the software development lifecycle, there are various phases, right, where you need to answer questions. Like the challenges we spoke to before present questions that you need to answer throughout each stage. For example, when you're in the analysis stage, you want to know who are the user groups that are using the software, how are they trying to use the software, and what problems are they trying to solve with the software. That gives you the ability to be able to design software that actually can solve those problems. You might also be asking yourself, which features are most actively used in my existing versions out there, or which features are never being used. So, that analysis before you go into the design stage, you might want to fix certain features or look into, why people are not using certain functionality in your software. When you're designing the application, then you need to look at supporting various platforms. So, how would you decide on whether you want to cut support for Windows XP, for example, or how many users are still using such legacy platforms, and what architectures are your users running? When looking into functionality that already exists within your software, during implementation, you might encounter a number of times, maintenance issues, like you want to develop a new feature, but this feature is dependent on whatever, like legacy code. You want to decide whether or not to retain that legacy code. So sometimes you're asking yourself, and this is typically a product management question that is also handled by engineering, which is, when is it time to deprecate this function or this functionality, or deprecate support for a particular platform to be able to allow you to move on and build cooler products or cooler functionality that is not hogged down by whatever legacy code you have. Another thing, when you go into testing, when you're talking to the QA team, you want your QA team to focus mostly on the platforms that are affecting most of your users, right? So kind of knowing what architectures are being used out there will help the QA team know where to focus. And if you have a beta program especially, and you're deploying your software out there, and you're relying on your users to test this functionality, you might want to know what issues these users are encountering that they're not telling you about, because it could be that you have 500 downloads of your beta application, but how do you know how many beta users are actually actively using it, and how do you know which features they use, and what platforms were they running it on? So all this is crucial information for you to help you get to the release stage. Once you're at the release stage, obviously, you need a method by which you can push everyone on the latest releases. So knowing who is still running an old version or old build, etc., would be very helpful in you for you to increase the adoption of the latest release. And in the analysis stage, we were discussing how do you choose on which features to buy, or which features to deploy, or which features to actually develop. After you release it, are customers actually using those features? First they told you they can't live without that feature, but once you gave it to them, are they actually making use of it in the right manner? And then there's also the issue of support, because there are a number of times, as you might very well know, that customers encounter problems, but they never report them to support. So kind of, if you have a method by which you can collect such information like crashes, exceptions, etc., it will help you prioritize bug fixes. And I know a few of you are already using this, collecting crash reports, but having a usage intelligence system that can also collect crash reports will help you in this manner. So let's look at the earlier stage of the software development lifecycle, like when you're designing and implementing your product. Most of the time, this is usually a joint decision between product management and engineering as to when you start building the product roadmap and planning the next release. You want to define the minimum requirements of your product, or what the product should do and should not do. In this case, we see that 33% of you are not using data. So, I was wondering how many of them actually are taking decisions based on the hippo in the room. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the hippo analogy. It's practically the highest paid person's opinion. So if you're around the table in the conference room trying to decide what goes into the next release, who actually decides what goes into there? Who decides what operating systems or architectures you're going to support? Who decides what should be the minimum resolution of the UI? Is it like the loudest person in the room? Is it based on support? Is it data that you collect from different people within your organization, or are you actually speaking to customers? So of course, the 50% of you guys that are using usage analytics can very easily answer this question, but the rest might have an issue because you're taking decisions based on gut feelings. So the same goes when you're looking into features and functions within your product. If you decide that you want to, or you're thinking about pulling out a feature from your product because it's not being used or you think it's not being used, you need to know how many people are actually using it, in what way they're using it, and whether the way they're using it is actually the way it was intended. So maybe you want to fix a feature, not pull it out, because people want to use it, but they can't figure out how to use it properly. And this will also help you focus your research and development on features that actually matter, features that are impacting most of your users. When you look at supporting legacy versions and functions, we know that in software development, this is one of the major headaches, right? You either pull the plug on an old version, or else spend loads of time based on both support and engineering to support these old platforms and legacy code. So when is the right time to see support for such an old version? And when is it the right time to sunset a legacy feature? How do you know whether a user is using a feature or not? And therefore, how do you know whether clients need to be taught how and why to move on to your latest releases or versions? And here's like a simple screenshot from your Analytics dashboard, right? Let's say you're facing the decision of, what operating system to support. Here you can see literally a report showing you exactly how many users are running what platform. So if you want to see whether, it's time to switch to 64-bit, that you still have whatever, like 35% of users running, actually, it's more here, it's like 70% of users still running a 32-bit machine. So that's definitely a decision you cannot take right now. It's still too early to switch to fully 64-bit only. If you want to switch, you're a .NET developer, you want to switch from one framework to the other. Maybe you want to benefit from the new functionality in .NET version 4.5 or whatever. Can you do that? How many people are still stuck on version 3.5 and they cannot run version 4 for some reason? The same thing goes if you want to, do changes in your UI. For example, in the user experience, you will definitely need to know how many people have what types of screens and resolutions. You cannot say, I'm going to stop supporting, less than 180 resolution if, you still have 50% of your users still running that type of monitor. And the same thing goes with architectures. You have various data that you're collecting from users. Knowing when you can take certain decisions and in what way, and exactly how many people will be affected will be crucial. When you move on to more detailed decisions like feature usage, in terms of deploying new features or changing the features in your product, something like this is another report from a basic feature event usage frequency, which is practically telling you how many people are using each feature in what edition of the product, etc. So knowing exactly how many people are using it will give you an idea of how popular a feature is, whether you should invest more in this feature. And you can also discover stuff like in this case, we're seeing 40% of users are never using the print button operation. So why is that? Is it because they're not finding out about it? Is it because they use it once and they never use it again? So these types of reports will give you those answers. So then you can focus, prioritize your task based on new functionalities that maybe are coming from feature requests from customers. You can focus on, what's in the product management roadmap, and also see how much time you need to spend on maintaining and supporting particular functionality in your software. So this leads us to another poll, actually. We would like to know how you guys are deciding on which features are most important. And, especially the 33% of you who said don't use usage analytics, I'd be very interested to hear how you make these decisions right now. So, David?
Yes. Also, I want to let everybody know you can choose more than one answer on this question. So, of course, is your decision making based on what customers want, the needs of the sales team? I like the guy who screams the loudest, or the hippo in the room. feedback from the support team, or actual analytics of how the application is being used. Okay, so we'll collect answers again for about 10 more seconds, and then we'll move forward. Back to you, Keith.
Thank you very much, David. So, yeah, I mean, whilst we wait for the rest of the respondents, next we'll be talking a bit more about the later stage of the software development lifecycle, which is the release stage. But before we go into that, maybe we'll have a look at the responses from you guys to see how many are actually, relying on the Hippo versus how many are relying on data and feedback. So, do we have any results, David?
Yeah, interestingly, only 32% are using usage analytics. Most people, customer feature requests. Second place tie, feedback from sales and feedback from support. And the guy who screams the loudest is really not given that much consideration. So interesting results.
That's very interesting. Okay, so well, sales are actually a very good source of, the sales channel are a very good source of reflecting what the customers are asking for. However, from my experience, I also found out that sales can be a very dangerous source to rely on. And the reason being, if there's a sales guy that loses a single deal based because a customer was looking for whatever, let's say Java support, right? And you don't support Java on your product or whatever, then that guy is going to tell you, what, like if we have Java, we'll be winning millions of dollars in revenue and new sales. But when you're literally drilled down into that, it cannot boil down to a single, might be a single lost deal. And I mean, the sales guy is right. I mean, it's in his interest to, or in her interest to, to push that feedback to you. However, you have to be very, very careful in applying context to that feedback, because it can be very, very skewed perception of reality, especially if you're only speaking to, a handful of sales teams or sales channels. On the other hand, also with regards to customer data, customer feature requests, knowing what your existing customers are after, and because you're talking to them, they're happily using your product and they're sending you requests every week or every month or whatever, it's awesome. However, keep in mind that you have a set of users that are installing your product and they're churning away. So knowing also what your non-customers would have wanted to buy your product would also be very, very crucial in you becoming more successful with your product. So always keep that in mind. And that kind of having the ability to use usage intelligence to collect data from also people who stop using your software, we can provide you with great evidence as to why people are moving away. So, you might be able to double your revenue in sales if you know exactly what to cover. I mean, what pain points to cover for those people that are not choosing to buy your software. So that's some great results, and the usage analytics being used by a third of you guys is really awesome. Those kind of usage analytics will help you really in taking real decisions based on facts, not simply on gut feeling. So let's have a look at the release stage now. When you're at the later on in the development life cycle, you need to prioritize release items. Sometimes we end up in a firefighting mode where you need to decide whether you have limited time until the release is out. So you need to decide whether you spend your time fixing a bug or whether you should finish up this new feature without delaying the whole release. Or sometimes you might say, it might be worth releasing this now and fixing the minor bug later because only a few people are affected by this bug. But to be able to take these decisions, you need to have data to back you up. So if there's a bug and it's going to be affecting only people with Windows XP, Service Pack 2, whatever, and that only like 10 people out there have this environment, then it might be an easy decision to say, I'm not going to delay the whole release. Let's just release and fix it in a minor build later on, and inform these people that hey, a fix is on the way. So it's very important for you to have data to back you up when prioritizing. The same goes when you're doing A/B testing. For those of you who do A/B testing, where you launch a product with different versions or different UIs to see what works, what doesn't work, usage intelligence can help you provide automated feedback for these A/B tests. So you know exactly what worked and what didn't. And you'll know this in real time. So you don't have to spend time, combing through data or through support requests or through feedback surveys or anything, because you have the data on your, online immediately that's being collected from your active user base. But if you're looking at the beta process, as we mentioned earlier, it's very important for you to know how active your beta users are, because it's useless running a 3-month beta program if your users are running your application for a day and, that's it. So you need to be sure that your beta program is actually working as it should. And knowing what test environments your product is being run on will greatly help in this case. And we mentioned support earlier. Support are able to address issues. Well, engineering are able to address issues as they come in, right? However, if you have a system by which data can come and flow in automatically, like when you're doing crash reports or exception tracking, etc., it will help you identify failure patterns and via stack traces, etc., because you'll know what's happening out there in the field. So this is an example of the Revulytics exception tracking report, right, where you're looking at exceptions that get immediately reported back to the server. You, as a developer, have access to all the exceptions that occurred on all environments and all architectures, so you can very easily, without the customer even calling support, you will know exactly that, this particular build, this particular class exception, method or whatever is causing certain exceptions on these environments. So, you can even have a look at the stack trace, debug it, fix it, issue a build, and the customer hasn't even called for support yet. So that would enable you to, first of all, you don't have to worry about how to collect the data from your user base, etc., because you use a framework that can do all that for you. And having a framework that's lightweight enough that does not impact your user experience will help you, collect data in real time, fix it without the user even knowing. So this brings us to the latest part of the life cycle, where you're releasing the product. So post-release, the product is out there, and you have a cool new version with cool new features, etc., and you don't know one thing. You don't know how many people are actually taking advantage of those users. So here, 70% of the respondents said they don't have the usage analytics. So in this case, it's very difficult to predict or know how many people are using the new versions, how long it takes them to adopt the new version, and how many of them are using the new functionality that you spend so much time trying to build. So knowing what product versions are out there and being used, and knowing what new features are used can also help you identify whether the decisions you took at analysis stage of how you believe the people would want to use your product have actually been reflected in reality. So you need to learn from the user's behavior to be able to improve the upcoming releases, because as you know, as soon as one release is out the door, you're already working on the next release, right? So knowing what you should be working on would be crucial. You also will find it very useful to monitor usage patterns, because sometimes you can see different personas within your customer base using your product in different ways. So in one way, being able to see what changes that you made to your product have worked and what didn't work would be very useful. And if you have a framework like Revulytics in this case, where which allows you to also send in-app messages to those users based on feature usage, you will be able to poke users to start using those new features. So for example, you can say, if a user runs my product for more than 30 days and they have run it for at least 3 hours, but have not used this cool feature X that I just deployed, then send them a pop-up message or something. Say, hey, it seems that you haven't used this feature yet. Why is that? Give us feedback, or do you even know it exists? So with in-app messages, which are very much reliant on usage intelligence data, you can achieve this much more easy. And what I mentioned earlier about knowing also what the lost users did with your product, which we call it churn analysis in Revulytics, knowing what features those users used before uninstalling your product would give you an indication as to whether your product is solving the problem that the user is trying to do. So if a user used a search term in Google to arrive to your landing page to download your product, and then tried your product, tried those features and didn't solve his problem, then that guy or girl might end up uninstalling the product. So knowing that actually happened and knowing exactly what features they used before uninstalling the product will help you identify that, that particular feature is being discovered because it's being used once, twice, 3 times, but it's not solving the customer's problem because they're uninstalling after, let's say, 3, 4, 5 days. So actually, we were working with some customers who were very surprised to learn that the evaluation of their product, like they had a 30-day full feature evaluation. And this particular company, they discovered that people were downloading, installing, and evaluating their product all within a 10-minute time frame. So within 10 minutes, the customer would have, or well, the lost prospect would have decided to uninstall the application without even going to day 2 of the evaluation. So, the emails that the company was sending to these people 5, 10 days, 20 days down the line to make them convert and buy a license were totally useless because the customer was decided within the first 5 minutes. And this is all stuff that would become very evident to you if you use software usage analytics. So here's an example of another report that's showing you the adoption of a new feature. So here we just released version 3.1. We can see the adoption rate of version 3.1, and we can see also the effect that had on the old version 2. But more importantly, this type of report will allow us to answer the question as to, when can we stop supporting the old version 1.5? And in this case, we can see that there's only 50 users using version 1.5. So maybe now it is time to actually stop supporting that. Let's send out an email to these guys or a pop-up message or something, and an app message to say, hey, version 1.5 will only be supported until end of month or end of quarter or whatever. So that would be a very easy decision to do. However, if we don't have usage analytics, then that would be, probably months of research and talking to different customers to do surveys to understand how many are still using the old version. And this is another report example of specifically related to feature adoption. So here we can see the effect in the screenshot of an example of how a change in the UI around mid-January changed the way people reacted to the post-install wizard. So here we can see that when they changed the UI, the post-install wizard started being used much, much more, as opposed to the manual setup of the product. So this caused a huge increase, changing the UI for it or how they presented it to the user increased the adoption of that install wizard quite a bit. But it also pointed out a major problem, because here you can see that, there is a number of users. So the yellow is the step 1 of the wizard. So how many people launched the wizard? The red line here shows how many people ended up in the last stage of the wizard, step 3. So the difference here, the delta you see, is the number of people who launched the wizard but never made it to step 3. And if you see it in numbers, this amounted to like 1,000 users here. So, this is a very evident kind of illustration that practically it's an illustration that gives you evidence on how many people are getting stuck in your install wizard. So in this particular case, the company went back and looked at the UI of the wizard, seeing how long people are getting stuck on the wizard. And here you can actually see in step 3, people were getting stuck for 21 minutes. So you can very, very easily create a fix to tackle this issue. And I've also mentioned an example of in-app messaging. So this is an idea of how in-app messaging can look like. You can have balloon pop-ups, you can have pop-ups on your screen. The good thing is it's in everyone's interest in your company and also for your customers for them to adopt the latest versions, latest releases, and the latest features, right? However, we found that using dynamic in-app messages, that is messages that are not simply hard-coded, right? These are not messages that are hard-coded that, show up after 7 days of usage or when the trial expires. These are messages that are based on how the user is interacting with the product. So you can, for example, say, show this message if a user runs the install wizard but never makes it to step 3 of the wizard. Show them a pop-up within a couple of days to say, hey, it seems you launched the wizard but you didn't finish it. Did you have a problem? Can we help you? Or, here is some materials that can help you out on that. And we actually found that for customers that switched from email follow-ups to in-app messaging, they really, really greatly increased the speed up of the adoption of the product. And we had some customers who claimed they had around 15%, emails were around 5 to 10% effective in getting people to upgrade, whilst in-app messaging were up to 25 to 30%. So what that means is that in-app messaging is much more effective than email because you're indicating to your client that whatever a new function is available, a new feature, whatever they need to do something, to take action on something, including, downloading a new version, at the most crucial time. You're telling them when they're running your application and they're sitting in front of your application. So that is the most effective time by which you can reach out to them. And having dynamic messages which are built based on the user's profile and the user's context and usage trend of the product will be much more effective, because you can say, as mentioned earlier, if you haven't used this feature, then let's send them a YouTube video of how to use that feature, for example. So this brings us to the big question: should I build it? Should I buy it? How should I go about, start using usage intelligence? And this applies to at least 70% of you guys listening on this webinar. One of the things, by now, you hopefully have realized that there are a bunch of benefits of using a business intelligence system, right? So since you are all developers, you might be thinking, sure, I can build this myself. I can build a whole call home system, or maybe you have already built a check for update system, and you might be thinking, why not beef that up and transform it into a call home system? A full-fledged reporting system. Given enough time and resources and expertise, of course, you can build anything, right? But keep in mind that you are also building a product for your company. So do you really afford giving up time building your product in order to build a usage intelligence system? And the reason I ask this is because, after you build it, you actually even need to maintain it. So even if you do go down that route, you have to be careful of not shooting yourself in the foot. It's very, very common to hear cases where engineering build a simple call home system, for example, to check for updates or something. And then what happens is when the rest of the company finds out about it, they will start making their own requests to engineering to why not add these metrics, why not start collecting this and that and whatever. And, there's an eternal appetite for data across the company. And engineering are the only guys that can implement this stuff, right? So everybody goes to engineering to do this. However, it's one thing building a simple call home system, but a totally different story to have a full-fledged data collection analytics platform, right? That anyone in your company can use. Because keep in mind, the data collection part is the easiest part of it all. It's very easy to do a call home, whatever, collect some data, whatever that data is, and throw it in a database. But building a flexible and scalable real-time reporting framework that meets the needs of engineering, product management, sales and marketing, that's a totally different beast. And what you have to keep in mind is that, each member within your organization have different needs, and these needs are changing over time. So, having the ability to build having the requirement to build a real-time data collection engine, you need to worry about the infrastructure, the design, the big data databases, etc. All the technology already exists out there. Fine with the Revulytics, we spent a few years building and tweaking the stuff before you get what you get today. So we're literally full-time working on that stuff. But if you're a developer and you're working on building your product, then you have to be careful that you do have actual time to do some deeper analysis and not just build a very quick system which then ends up not being used because it doesn't solve all the needs of your organization. So having said that, there are frameworks out there that you can use. Of course, Revulytics is just one of them. And what you have to keep in mind, when choosing a framework is that a framework needs to cater for, legal requirements. There are various EU data protection regulations, so anonymity of the data is crucial in this case. You need something that can help you build an opt-in, opt-out mechanism so that you don't irate any users if they don't want to be tracked, etc. Apart from that, you need to make sure that whatever solution you choose or build or whatever needs to have the data easily accessible by other third-party frameworks, because your organization might be using a CRM system, it might be using some other business intelligence system. Different executives within your company might need to build their own custom dashboards. So having the ability to present the data in a way that is consumable by all the different members in the organization, and having the data that can be joined with other data sources is crucial. So, even when you're choosing a framework, if you decide to go for a ready-made framework, make sure it has an API that allows you to pull data out of that framework. And something else that I mentioned an example earlier is in-app messages. So having the ability to take action on the data, not simply just collect data passively. And one of the ways of taking action is sending, engaging with your users via in-app messages, etc. Having the ability to have this integrated allows you to take advantage of all the data you know about a customer to be able to send more context-based messaging. So, I can use this for auto updates, for promotions, for conversions, to upsell, to collect feedback from users. So make sure that you choose a framework that can scale and adapt to your ever-changing needs, okay? So one thing I want to, before we start wrapping up on this, one thing I want to point out is that I have heard countless companies, over the past 7 years we've been working in this industry, who start building their own call home system or start building something in-house, which after some time, this becomes shelved. And it's a pity really, because they would have invested, some people have invested even hundreds of thousands of dollars in building big systems, which then end up being too complex to use. And by too complex, I mean, the marketing person does not know SQL queries. So you cannot expect to throw all the data in a database and get them to build their own SQL queries. So what they end up doing is go to engineering to, let's run this report, or let's create this new report, or whatever. So you want to avoid that. And another thing is that sometimes when building an in-house system, the system might not answer all the questions that your team is after, because keep in mind that product management has a totally different set of questions than the salesperson's. And too many resources that would be required to maintain this would end up always getting the back burner. And what this means is that such an in-house system would end up would stop evolving kind of. So what happens is that if you stop evolving such a system with the needs of your company, it stops being useful to your team. And that is the stage where people will end up shelving it, or ditching it and go to buy something ready-made. So keep in mind when choosing a framework that you need to do all of this stuff out of the box, and especially if you have a framework like with Revulytics, it takes like 30 minutes to integrate. How can you compare that to spending months developing your own system? So kind of keep that in mind, because you need to find a solution that avoids you headaches rather than add to whatever you have right now. So summarizing what we've discussed during this webinar, I mean, we looked at the importance of identifying with your end user. So kind of how do you know what are the end user's pain points? Understanding that is the first step in building great products, right? We've also seen some of the development pain points, and we also had a look at how software usage analytics can help you understand, tackle these pain points, right? So we looked at also, whether you should, what points you should look at when trying to build or buy a software usage analytics solution. And we looked at, how a ready-made framework such as Revulytics can actually help you in this case. So to close, I mean, to paraphrase Morpheus in the Matrix, kind of, after this, there's no turning back, right? So you take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up tomorrow in your bed and you believe whatever you want to believe about software applications. However, if you take the red software usage analytics pill, you will see how deep the rabbit hole goes, as Morpheus put it. So kind of you will be able to see what reality out there is really like. So this has brought us to the end of the webinar. However, before we close, we would like to open this up for questions, and I'll pass this back on to David to provide some of the questions so we can answer them.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you, Keith. Great presentation. I want to remind our attendees now is a good time to ask those questions. Go to the question panel in the control panel. Type in the question, hit submit, and again, we'll get to as many as time allows. Before we get to their questions, though, I have one for you. And that was earlier on in the presentation, you were talking about how the analytics can tell you if a feature has never been used, for instance. What I'm curious to know is how do you guys determine the why? Like, why was that feature never used? Is that part of that actionable engagement that you were just talking about a moment ago?
Yeah, so there are a couple of ways how you can do this. So the easiest, I mean, more obvious is like you can observe users who are using a feature or not using a feature, and you can, collect feedback, direct qualitative feedback from each and every one of those users about why they did not use it or why they used it. So you can do this by sending in-app feedback requests. You can have like a feedback button on your application to say, you know, only enable this if the user hasn't used the feature. So that's one way of doing it. However, what you find out when you're looking at more aggregate data like and usage patterns and user flows, etc., is that you start identifying patterns of how users are behaving in the way they are. So for example, they might, you know, be clicking on the whatever big red print button. But before they do that, they take like 3 different steps. And you might notice that there are these patterns that are occurring over and over again. So why people are doing that might be answered by looking at their usage patterns of the whole product. So, you know, what is leading them to go to that red button or to open this this view or whatever. Like we saw the example of the install wizard. You know, why are people not finishing the wizard? You know, looking at the data can help you understand that, hey, people are actually trying to use the wizard, but they're getting stuck in step 3. So that is why they're doing what they're doing.
All right, that was an excellent answer. Thank you very much. Okay, so one question that we have now from one of the attendees wants to know how pricing and licensing works.
How pricing and licensing, I'm assuming, related to Reviolytics, right? Well, I mean, the pricing itself, you literally can download and integrate Reviolytics for free, and then you can buy a plan that is based on the number of tracked installations. So if you have, you know, 10,000 users, 1 million users, etc., you buy a plan that can cater to for tracking 1 million active installations every month. So pricing is based practically on the number of users being tracked. And license, kind of you license it per product. So you tell us we have a software application. The software application has approximately 10 to 20,000 installations, and we build a plan for you based on those 2 criteria.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next question that we have is from one of our attendees. You referred to security best practices. Does your solution provide a means to encrypt the data that's being transmitted between a customer and the RTI server?
Yes, so the SDK itself, it handles multiple things from the client side, right? So we have, first of all, I mean, the SDK version 5, for example, it can transmit everything over HTTPS. However, what we do also, and it's optional for you to enable, you can say, try and transmit all the data over HTTPS. However, if you're behind a firewall or a gateway that's blocking HTTPS traffic, then you can fall back to HTTP, and we actually do encryption within that HTTP tunnel. So kind of if only port 80 is allowed on these machines, we can still like pass through and collect the data, and the data would still be encrypted inside the HTTP tunnel. So kind of that's you know, that's how the security aspect from the transmission is handled. There are also other security aspects, like for example, on the first call home, the client and server do a key exchange. So every client is identified by a unique client ID. Kind of you have your own product ID that's embedded in the hard-coded in the product. So kind of there are various other aspects that you know are handling security in that stage. And also once every message is signed by the client, so kind of you know that helps you know avoid man-in-the-middle attacks because it's fingerprinted. So kind of if the message is changed in the way like throughout the network, etc., the server would know and would reject that message, etc. So apart from that, we also give you the ability to have your own call home URL. So literally you can have like, you know, analytics.mydomain.com, and your users would be, you know, this is more of a user perception thing. Your users would be more comfortable knowing that they can open the gateway or send data to analytics.mydomain.com because they know they bought the software from you. They know that you're a reliable company. So it's not like they're sending data to some unknown rogue server on the internet. So that's also something that we kept in mind in the design to help you and your customers' perception.
Okay, so I just want to remind our attendees that we're still accepting questions to be answered. So if you have one, send it in now. And again, we'll get to as many as time allows. Next question would be, does your solution support mobile applications like iOS and Android?
So right now we have solutions for desktop applications, which are Windows, Linux, and Mac. However, we are also working on building a software as a service SDK, so kind of an SDK that would be able to track anything via either JavaScript or web or any web application. So literally, if you have a mobile app and you can start using that, I mean, that's something that would be coming later, early next year.
Great. Okay. So another question that we have here, can you confirm that you're collecting anonymous data and not personal data? That's a good question.
Yes, and that is a very, very important design aspect within Revulytics. All the data that is collected by default is totally anonymous. The way we identify users is by generating a fingerprint for that user, and that fingerprint is based on like the hardware architecture ID and like the installation path. So once that fingerprint is generated, all the data generated by that user would be associated with that user ID, and therefore the server would still know when you're running analytics reports, we would still know that that is the same user that took those actions like 3 months ago, etc. So we know exactly the whole story behind the user, but we do not identify that user. And this is very important, especially for EU regulations, right? Because with EU regulations, especially with the new privacy regulations, even the IP address can be considered as user identifiable. So what we do actually is when the user calls home, we get the IP address checked against a GeoIP database. We look at the location of the user and we dump the IP address. So the IP address never makes it into our database. And what that means for you is that you can literally tell your users, hey, this is a totally anonymous system, and it's it abides by all the regulations, both EU, US, etc. And it gives you the ability to still track each individual user, but in an anonymous way. Having said that, there are ways by which you can also identify users, and if your EULA allows you to, and if the agreement that you have with your users allow you to. So we still provide you the ability to collect what we call like custom properties or custom events, which we have companies using them to identify, for example, large deployments. So and they actually use this because the companies that use their software actually want access to this data too. So what they do is they identify the user and they provide this user, which are typically enterprise companies, with usage analytics reports every quarter about what their employees are doing with the software they purchased. And the reason they do this is because there's a bunch of value that an end user would get from knowing this, because if they're paying, like, especially with high value software, sometimes they're paying 50 grand, 100 grand a year in licensing for this software. Knowing what functionalities are being used by the software and what is not being used allows them to educate their users to get more return on investment on the software that they just purchased.
Okay, very good. So along those lines, is the raw data that you're collecting from customers available for download? Not sure who that would be available to, but go ahead.
Yeah. So we actually do have a method by which you can collect the custom raw data, and you have the ability to download that either via API or via our CSV archives. So literally you can, if you wanted to, you can collect the fact, let's say you want to track that this button was clicked, right? And apart from that, you want to collect a bunch of user data, your custom data related to the program state, for example, when the button was clicked. So kind of, yes, that is available. We store the fact that the event occurred, we store all the user details, etc., and provide it to you in like raw CSV format or JSON format, depending on what method you're using to access that data.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. So here's an interesting question. So what is the impact of embedding analytics on application performance?
Well, if you choose a framework that has been designed well, it should not affect the performance of your application, right? So, I can speak on behalf of the Revulytics SDK, right? Which, for example, this has been designed with the ability to cache files locally, for example. So you're not generating a web request every time you want to track something. the cache file is compressed and uploaded once every few hours of usage. So kind of you're not generating web requests very often. And the fact that it's compressed, I mean, it's typically uploaded in a few milliseconds and it consumes maybe just a couple of kilobytes or something. So uploading the file, caching it, etc., it's all part of the SDK that you don't need to worry about. But the application performance itself, it's negligible. To be honest, we tried to do like some tests on like how much impact this is on performance, but kind of the measurement of that performance impact was, you know, skewing the results because it was so negligible. So you know, having the ability, first of all, there's impact in terms of the impact you need to worry about is, you know, the application performance itself, and the fact that you have async calls, etc., will help in not your application never getting stuck in any way or halt because there's no internet access or whatever. But you also need to keep in mind that the light fingerprint of the application, kind of the fact that the log is uploaded in a few kilobytes in a few milliseconds, that would help in you not impacting in any way the performance, even the user experience when interacting with your application.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're coming up on the hour. It looks like we have time for one more question. I'll throw it out at you. So what is typically involved in getting started with usage analytics?
Well, I mean, this depends on how deep you want to go in analytics. We find that the best way is usually don't bite too, you know, bigger than you can chew. So what I mean, with regards to Reviolytics, for example, the integration itself is very simple. It's like 10 lines of code. You register a free account, you download the SDK, and you add 10 lines of code to your application to integrate the DLL. That's it, and you start tracking. So kind of within less than an hour of integration time, you're already tracking in real time the basic analytics, right? Later on, then when you start advancing more into analytics, you start asking more advanced questions, then that's what might be the time where you might want to look at more advanced functionality, like, for example, tracking license key usage or collecting custom data every time a feature is used, etc. So you can start very, very easily and very quickly, you know, less than 1 hour, and then, you know, 3-6 months down the line, you might want to look at more advanced functionality that might consume some more time, but by then you would be more mature in knowing exactly what your company is after. The good thing is kind of the fact that you use a ready-made framework. You don't have to think about all the stuff that you might need like 1 year down the line, because all that has been thought about already and that has been is integrated as part of the SDK or the service. So, you know, it's very easy. I would suggest everyone kind of, unless you're already using usage analytics, I would suggest that you give it a try at least. You know, you will be surprised what you can learn and the goldmine of information you can get out of this. I mean, if you just go to devzone.reviolytics.com, you can have access to a free account, download the SDK for free, try it out. There's no commitment, so you can at least have a hands-on feel of what type of data you can collect with that.
Excellent. That was a great Q&A. Appreciate that, Keith. So we have about 30 seconds left. If you want to sum up, what's the one takeaway that people should leave this webinar with in terms of usage analytics? Well, I mean, data is always right. So kind of if we want to take one thing out of this, is that kind of the hippo might not be always right, but data is always right. And identifying with your users and knowing your users' pain point is the best way of building great products. I believe, I mean, obviously, I'm being involved in this industry for a number of years now, but I believe that usage intelligence is the key to taking informed decisions. So don't just rely on your gut feeling, use data, rely on that data, and choose a framework that will save you time rather than shooting yourself in the foot and you know, getting too complicated out there. So yeah, get data and take good decisions. Excellent. Thank you so much, Keith. All right. I would like to thank Reviolytics for sponsoring today's program, and Keith Fennick, of course, for a great presentation. I'd like to thank all you attendees who hung with us for the hour. And on behalf of SD Times, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief. And until we do this again next time, so long, everybody. Have a good day.